All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Oh, that was lame. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Awesome. So we are so excited to be here this morning. I'm going to do a little bit more introductions because I practice name pronunciation, and I want to be very successful with that. So, like Denise said, Sumbul, yes, Siddiqui, is a first-term city council member in Cambridge, and she got a BA in public policy from Brown and a law degree from Northwestern, and she co-founded the Cambridge Youth Council, earning her a Cambridge Peace and Justice Award. Kesha was elected to the Vermont House of Reps at 22 years old. Who's 22 in the House? Clearly not me. Awesome. And she spent her first few years as the youngest legislator in the United States during her time. And then she recently graduated from very close to here from the Harvard Kennedy School. And then last but not least, Allie Curtis was Miss Rhode Island in 2015 and currently is enlisted in the Army National Guard and served as her student body president at Syracuse University and worked in Congresswoman Ross Lettinen's office a couple years ago. And I'm sad she's retired. Oh, I'm so sad. So sad. So we wanted to have a little bit of a conversation so our panel is young and running, and we all have young people. I ran for my first election in the first grade and kept running, and now currently serve on a community board in my county in California working on healthcare policy and to ensure that we allocate $5 million to our county in the best way possible to meet the best needs of our community. And so I'm the only person of color. I am also 10 years younger than any of my other committee board members, and so representation matters, clearly. And so I'm super excited and pumped to have this dynamic group of humans with me today. And so first, let's talk a little bit about paths to political leadership and where we all started and why you decided to go on this path.
Sure. Is my mic on?
Yeah, here we go.
Great,
The echoes
great.
in the library has started.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Sara, for the introduction. So my path started really early, and that's because as a high school student, I worked with one of my friends and we co-founded a youth council. And really, we wanted to get more involved with the city government. And I have a distinct memory of myself in the city hall chambers. We were testifying on trying to lower the voting age to 17 in local elections. And the city councilors were speaking to us. And I remember back in my head thinking, that job, sounds this looks really fun. And so I filed it in the back of my head and, went to college, went to law school, came back in 2014 and got more involved in Cambridge and saw that, wow, some of the people who were on council back then are still on council. There's no term limits. So I said, and also there's no young person on the city council. So I thought that was problematic. And there's one woman of color on the city council, and this is Cambridge. And so, the 2016 election happened, and that really propelled me into thinking, okay, I think it's something that I can finally do. And for me, I knew that I love constituent services. I'm a legal aid attorney as well. And I also wanted the broader policy experience. I've been impacted by policies in my personal life, everything from affordable housing early on, from Head Start. So I know the power that public policy has. And the chance to do that in Cambridge was a city council. I decided to run. It was 26 candidates in the election for 9 seats, 6 of whom were incumbents. And I ended up getting the second highest number of votes in the election. And I have to say, there is no greater honor than to serve. It's a dream. It's not always easy, but it is. You wake up and you get to help people, and I couldn't be happier. So I'm very lucky to be doing this and to be serving my first term.
So first of all, what a tremendous honor to speak at the Kennedy Library. I'm just taking this all in because if you had asked me to speak about thermodynamics in the basement, I would be here. And sitting in front of all of you is a tremendous honor. As you heard, I graduated from the Kennedy School last year, and I spent a lot of time here. I really came here to look for guidance and to reflect. It was post-2016 election, and this is an incredible place to come to think about tumultuous times in our country. And I don't know if any of you have nerded out like I have and watched the introductory video. That's 20 minutes, like many, many times. But the first quote from John F. Kennedy in that film is not one of his most famous ones. Does anybody know what it is? And Alan Price isn't here anymore, so he can't answer. I actually have the transcript of the video, and I'm still going to paraphrase, but President Kennedy says something like, "The opposite of a truth is not a lie, but a myth, because a myth is pervasive, and it pushes us in directions towards things that we can't really achieve, and that we set ourselves up for failure by looking at the myth and measuring ourselves by that standard." And women's heads are filled with so many myths about running for office. You're not qualified enough, you have to have a story about your kids, tripping on the sidewalk to run, that young women really have no place until they've had kids and they've done enough and they've gotten 2 master's degrees. And when you say you're qualified and you say that you're ready to serve in office, that's not a lie. Men wake up every morning and look in the mirror and say, "I'd be great." Okay, so for you to get up and say, "I understand what it's like to try to pay off my student loans and think about affording a house in the next 10 years and raising children and paying for childcare. I know what it's like, to watch my peers struggle to find a job, to do any number of the things that we're dealing with right now, or think about generationally what's happening with climate change." You have a life horizon that qualifies you to be in government, and you're highly underrepresented there. And so, I'm just thinking about how being nervous on the same scale that I was the first time someone encouraged me to run for office. And Sara has me beat. I did run in 5th grade for student council. I was the only girl, and I won. And I gave all these speeches at the school board about lunch and things. But I took a hiatus from politics after 5th grade. I was an environmental activist. I thought a lot about how you rail against systems of power. I didn't really feel like I had a voice. And in 2006, I was a sophomore at the University of Vermont. And Bernie Sanders was running for the US Senate for the first time from Congress. And his team said, "You know what, we have the mayor, we have our candidate for Congress, we have this rock star senator from Illinois speaking. They're all pretty great, but they're all men. I wonder if we could get a woman from the university to speak." Oh my God, bonus, a woman of color, that's amazing, let's get her up here. So I was asked to speak in front of 2 pretty great orators in our country, this rock star senator from Illinois that was becoming more well-known, and then Congressman Bernie Sanders. And I was asked to introduce the event, and I talked about student debt and climate change and how we need to elect leaders who really listen to young people. And I didn't fall off the stage or screw up my speech, so I was very proud of myself. And they go down the line of speakers, and this rock star senator from Illinois is closing out the event. And he says, "I have a father from Kenya and a mother from Kansas." And I thought, I have a father from India and a mother from Illinois, and I've never heard a story like this in politics. And I have a funny name no one can pronounce, and thank you, Sara, for doing such a great job. And started invoking the civil rights movement and talking about the arc of the moral universe bending toward justice. And I thought, what mainstream US senator speaks this way? And in the middle of all that, he turned to Bernie and he said, "And you know what, Bernie? If you don't behave yourself, we're going to run Kesha for the Senate instead of you." So he knew my name, so that was really cool. And it was the first time anyone really encouraged me to run for office. And I had to peel away all those layers of thinking, this isn't how, I'm not meant to be in politics. I don't look like a politician. And 2 years later, we shared a ballot. And he became the 44th President of the United States. I became the youngest legislator in the country.
Wow.
Wow, tough acts to follow. It is a huge honor to be here, especially with these two. But thinking about my early introduction to politics, I've actually lived in 7 different states and the District of Columbia. I've moved around a lot in my life, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that my father is a political journalist. So I had a front row seat to many different elections and different conflicts in politics throughout my life, and that really got me interested. And I always remember looking at the political landscape and thinking, well, where are people who are like me? And then when I was 15 years old, I decided I'm gonna run for United States Congress at some point in my life, which was a very weird thing for a 15-year-old girl to say. And I want to change that, and I think we're at a point where now being 15 and saying, I'm gonna be a senator or a congresswoman one day is not so bizarre. Even more bizarre, I was 16 years old and having dreams that I was filibustering on the Senate floor. So I'm a huge nerd. But I went to college, I went to Syracuse, and during my first week, I decided I was going to join the student government, and I went to an introductory meeting, and I honestly thought I was lost because I walked into an entire auditorium filled with men. And I'm looking around thinking, am I at a fraternity meeting? What's going on here? There's no women. And then confirmed it was the right place. And it was in that moment where I thought, well, there needs to be more representation and there needs to be more women involved, and there aren't even women serving in executive capacities here. So I got involved, I started running, I went to a national conference, and there was a panel on women's leadership in student governments, and another woman was like, oh, you know, I really don't want to go listen to that feminist rant. And again, another point where I was like, it's such a shame that feminism is a dirty word, and there are women who think they're not going to benefit from this. So I'm starting to put the pieces together. Of how I can alleviate this problem, and as a sophomore, I became student body vice president. It was difficult, being in the public eye, even on a college campus, and thinking, wow, there's a lot of pressure. I almost talked myself out of running for student body president, and then determined that who better than me? I've already been in this kind of executive role, and if I think it's gonna be difficult as a woman and I'm already in this great place to run, it's just gonna be more difficult for somebody else down the line. So I decided to make the run. It was tough. I ended up winning, and through all of that, I developed a program called Leading Ladies to help alleviate the problem of women in student bodies across the country thinking they're underqualified, and not just in government, but in spaces that have been traditionally male-dominated. So in 2015, I had been given the great honor to represent the state of Rhode Island at Miss America, and with great power comes great responsibility, and I used that as an opportunity to start a national discussion about women in spaces where they have been historically underrepresented, whether it's been government, technology, business, the military. And that was so meaningful to me. And beyond that, I had this little list, kind of like my fantasy list, women who I would drop everything for in my life and go run their campaign if they were to get on a ballot. And a good friend of mine who had been Miss Vermont calls me up, and I'm getting through grad school at Brown, and she says, well, what are you doing after you graduate? I want you to come move to Vermont and run my campaign, and no questions asked. 10 minutes later, I had plans to pack up my bags and move to Vermont once I was done. And I did that. We were able to get out there as a 24-year-old and a 26-year-old candidate and campaign manager. And it was so cool to have young girls open their door while we're out canvassing, and to see 2 young women. And we looked at each other one time and we're like, this is so wild. There are going to be young women who grew up not thinking it's at all strange to see young women out there moving and shaking in their communities. And she didn't win, but again, as the mayor said earlier, sometimes it's not about winning, but elevating the conversation. So that's been my path in politics. I ended up enlisting in the military. So the plan to run has been put on hold for a little bit, but that's absolutely in the future. And I'm very excited to take my own experiences with what I've done in the service and be able to channel that into a future in politics.
All right, so we all obviously come to the space today with lots of different intersectionalities, And we all talked a little bit about, being young, being a young woman, being a person of color, being an immigrant, being X, Y, Z. And at Ignite, a lot of our young women feel like the X, Ys, and Zs are sometimes deficits to running for office. And they're like, well, my mom can't feed me, there's not enough food to put on the table, and so I don't want it to come out that I'm low income, or that I'm, all of these different policy issues that we are going to heavily discuss today and figure out solutions to, because women work together. And so I'd love for us to kind of turn our conversation into, what are your intersectionalities, and where do you feel like you're leveraging them each day in the different roles that you're serving?
Do you want me to start?
Anybody can start.
Do you want to start?
Sure. So first of all, I grew up in my Indian immigrant father and Jewish American mother's Irish pub in Los Angeles. So from out of the gate, there was a lot of challenges and a lot of things to weave together. And I think that made life a little easier for me as I had to keep integrating. I moved to Vermont. I call myself a climate immigrant, and we're seeing that sadly more than ever now with the wildfires in California, but I wanted clean air, I wanted seasons. I found Vermont. And from the moment I got there, people said, you're really not afraid to speak up. We don't see a lot of people like you around here. And that meant a lot of opportunities to grow and to really enjoy that leadership role that people gave me the space for. But I am really, really understanding and empathizing with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's experience right now in Congress. When I was running for the legislature, my opponents said, well, she talked about growing up on the free lunch program, but she has really nice genes, so I don't really understand, this isn't computing. And things that, there's very little understanding of what it means to be a young woman running for office, what it means to be a woman of color being judged by your appearance, what it means to carry, existing stigma and shame around the way you grew up and shopping at the Salvation Army to finally trying to be able to afford something nicer that you can wear and really present yourself as a legislator. I have to say, our first and only female governor, Governor Madeline Kunin, met with me when I was first running for the legislature. I have no idea what I was thinking, but I wore a hooded sweatshirt and jeans and flip-flops to meet with her, which just looking back was just, I grew up with an immigrant parent. I try not to be disrespectful to someone so important. Really don't know what I was thinking, but she's that humble that she was like, I still support you, this is amazing. She's become like a grandmother to me. And 3 years later in the legislature, we were celebrating the 25th anniversary of her being elected, and I was wearing my tweed suit that I could finally afford, and she said, you do clean up very nice. So, that ongoing struggle with how you look and how people are judging you. When I first got to the legislature, my goodness, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez talking about being sent to a spouse event. I kind of wish, I didn't know she was going to say she was put with the congressional pages or something, because when I got to the legislature, they wouldn't even give me my legislative ID card. And when I went back to my committee room, my chair, who was a very thoughtful woman trying to make me feel welcome, said, do you think it's because you're young or a woman or a person of color? And I said, I don't think you can separate the three in this situation, and I don't know how I'm going to navigate this environment. But I really came to value and experience it as an asset. And I will say this, there were so many older Republican men who thought, if I can relate to her and we can go have dinner together, maybe the world isn't so scary after all. And for me, it was the same feeling. If we can find common ground, then I can really make it here. I can sort of gain that respect. And I would say, one thing that Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is really being labeled as youngest congresswoman, youngest. When I got to the legislature, there was somebody in his 50s who had served since he was 19. He had been there 38 years. And he turned to me early in my term and he said, Kesha, if you act like the youngest legislator and you set yourself apart as the youngest legislator, people are going to treat you like the youngest legislator. You don't want that. You want to figure out what gets everybody up in the morning, keeps them up at night, and find that common ground. And that was really enriching, not only for me professionally, but more so personally. the ability to really relate to my colleagues and know that it was a cultural plunge for them to get to know me, but also for me to get to know a dairy farmer who grazes, his herd in both Canada and Vermont every day, and then, kind of falls asleep sometimes in the legislature because he's been up so long in the morning. So, those were the things that I felt like I don't have to sit here and say, I'm a young woman of color, none of you will understand me, but really find that common ground.
So one of the things I like to talk about, my experience running at Syracuse University, where you would think a lot of your peers, your peers are voting for you. These are people who support you, who see you on a regular basis. And when I decided to run, I started getting a lot of feedback. You're very feminine. I think you should tone it down, or maybe don't wear pink, or lose the lipstick, things that were just inherently a part of my self-expression and my appearance. And I started playing that game where I'm like, okay, maybe I'll wear glasses instead of contacts. I won't curl my hair. I won't wear the lipstick. I'll wear jeans to class. I'll wear a football jersey. All of the things I was getting and all of this noise. And then I remember thinking distinctly, this is such a small level of erasing my identity. And I don't want any other woman who puts themselves in this position to ever erase any part of their identity because they think they need to fit a certain mold, or they're told to fit a certain mold because of who they are and what the legislature or what government has looked like for the extent of time. So I set all of that aside. I did me. I was unapologetically me. And that's something that has always stuck with me, because the game doesn't change unless game changers are out there putting themselves out there and owning who they are and owning their identities. So that's always something that has been first and foremost. As a young woman, don't let anyone change who you are, and don't let anyone mute your identity, no matter what that is. And then in terms of identities and who I am, something that's been so important to me is to see that visibility and see that representation. And I know we all feel that, and there's somebody who we can look to, who we really identify with. And one of the first people for me in legislature to see was Tulsi Gabbard, who is a huge inspiration for me, and also has been a huge game changer across the board. And this is a very exciting time, because as a female service member, we are now, of course, in a historic time for so many different identities entering Congress. But for the first time, we have more female veterans than ever before. And I know that there are issues that I will see, that I've dealt with, that will be handled by other women as well. So it's great to be able to elevate those issues, to identify with them. And if you're ever in a space where you look around and say, well, I can't identify with anything, then that is a key indicator that you need to be that trailblazer, and you need to be the one that provides that voice and that space of representation.
Yeah, what you're saying, reminds me of a saying that I've said many times. It's you can't be what you can't see. And for me, my different intersectionalities, my identities come into play every day. I was born in Pakistan and grew up in Cambridge, grew up in affordable housing. And now that I've been in office, I've seen that I get calls from people who speak Hindi, who speak Spanish, who speak Urdu, who have grown up, who are living in the developments that I lived at, who feel comfortable that they can call me and say, I am having a housing issue. I'm dealing with this issue. So to be able to have that opportunity to help them just by being there has a huge impact. The other identity I have is as an attorney. I think about last night. My last night was a little bit crazy, but kind of typical about how my different identities come into play. I was invited to a first-generation mixer that the mayor was hosting. I went to that for about 25 minutes, talked to some high school students from Cambridge and Lyon, where I also went. After that, I went to the Taj Boston for an annual gala for the South Asian Bar Association. I'm on the board. Spent maybe an hour there, went back to Cambridge to the Royal Sonesta for a annual gala for Justice Star Corporation, a community development corporation that works on housing issues, affordable housing. Spent 20, 30 minutes there. Went back to Taj Boston. So I am constantly balancing the different identities But I'm fortunate to be able to have these identities because it allows me to help so many different people who probably never trusted government before, but they see me and say that, okay, she has our back. She can fix the lights on the street that have been out for 8 months. She can help file a housing application on my behalf. So it is one of those things where it's rare, has been rare to have different identities at the table. Even the fact when I was running, I looked at the council and I said, most of the people here own their homes. There's no renters, right? There's over 60% of individuals in Cambridge rent their apartment. So even things like that, there's different commonalities you can find with different sectors of the population. So that's been really fun for me to be able to always be using my identities to help people.
Awesome. I think there's a lot of pieces that we are all working on in terms of intersectionality, and I think that that's a really big piece to keep leveraging and figuring out. I really loved what you said earlier, Kesha, with figure out what gets people up in the morning, keeps them up at night, and keep figuring out what that common ground is. Because I think earlier Anne talked about and last night we were at a dinner, and how polarized we are as a country in this time. And I know I'm only 30, I think I'm 34 right now. Figuring out how do we continue to have that common ground. And at Ignite, we're nonpartisan, so we're having these conversations with young women who actually are trying not to even identify in a particular party when they're registering to vote. That was our biggest experience the past couple of months. And they're like whispering to me, in different parts of the country, do I have to do this like this? And so I think that's one of the biggest pieces is like, if you're there and there's a visual representation, there's a lot more willingness to do what they need to do in terms of what, to move action in that piece. So we're going to talk social media next, and our panel has a very different view on social media, but I remember when I was campaigning for our 44th president, and I was a grad student in Denver, Colorado, and I literally drove for different states, and I was a little brown girl at 22 years old, canvassing, and that was real different. And it was a very, I didn't even have a Twitter account. I think I kind of just had Facebook. And so I'm curious, how do you feel like social media has kind of changed the game in campaigning, but also changed the game in the way that you all communicate with constituents, and what platforms do you even use? Allie, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'm big on social media. I work in public affairs. I have a degree in public relations, so social media is huge for me. But there are a lot of different theories behind social media, and I don't think there's one right way to do it. But the biggest takeaways are be authentic, and 2, provide a variety of depth in your content, and 3, be accessible. And it's a great way to reach out to younger voters, especially because that's where so many people are, but also know your demographics. There's going to be an older crowd on Facebook, might be younger on Twitter, even younger on Instagram, Snapchat. There's a variety of different routes you can take. But it was key for me in whether it was me running student body campaigns, working on elections. I've done social media outreach and been a digital content curator on several campaigns now. And I say, have a blog where people can actually see you write in depth on the matters that you're passionate about, and be very thoughtful with what you put out there, of course. But it's a great way for people to say, okay, well, I really see this person's perspective and their life experience in a way that I wouldn't otherwise just by a tweet or a short Facebook post. But it's a great way to be accessible to different people. Not everyone, I think especially with millennials, not everyone totally understands the concept of going and meeting with someone directly. So it's one way that you can remove that barrier, and you can also be highly responsive to your constituents and to your electorate. So I'm a big proponent of social media, and I say do it, and just be very thoughtful with which forms and which platforms are right for you. If you're running for president, you might have everything from Facebook to Snapchat. If you're running for a local position, you can do without the Snapchat. You can probably do without the Instagram, but do what's right for you or in your constituency.
No, you go ahead.
I hate social media. I cannot tell you how much I dislike it. In the beginning of the campaign, I was told, okay, social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and I said, I'll do the Facebook, but even that it's not going to be every day. I concentrated on my door knocking. I did my door knocking. That's basically where I spent the bulk of my time. Building those one-on-one relationships. So something that I did early on was and I still do it, I have a weekly newsletter that I send out on Sunday nights. And that weekly newsletter is a huge hit. It's for constituents to learn about what I do each day during the week. And so that's been a way that I've kept in touch with constituents. I have a weekly podcast called Women Are Here. Download it. Yeah. Plug for my podcast. It's free on iTunes. So that podcast, I do that with another city councilor. That's another way I keep up with constituents. Then I do spend maybe, I'd say, an hour or two on social media per week. I'm not a fan because I think, for me personally, I find it very problematic just I'm doing the work, and then people are like, take a picture of that and put it on, show what you're doing. It just feels not authentic to me. I do it sometimes, but it's like last night, I didn't put that on social media. So I really struggle with it. I do need to get better with it and use it more as a tool, but I found that it is good to be authentic. If I feel like I don't want to be a fake. And I think with what I've seen with social media, if you are posting every second of the day, your message gets diluted, right? It's a little bit too much. So I'm working on finding a balance, but I really haven't used it in my life, and I've been pretty successful without it. And also, a lot of my constituents, we're assuming people look at social media. It is for, the younger generation, sure, but if you have to figure out how you cast a net with people like my mom. My mom's and really doesn't get what Facebook is, right? There's a lot of people like that. So there's other ways that you keep in touch, you people and saying, hey, hi, how are you doing? It's been, 6 months to my term. Please let me know if I can do anything for you. So making those personal connections versus this social media, because I do think it's just not fun. So if people want to help me, for my next campaign for social media, I'm open, but I won't make. Yeah, maybe you can make a talk.
She'll make your editorial calendar.
Exactly. Yeah.
So hopefully I represent kind of somewhere in the middle here. I was in college. I started college the same year Facebook started, so I'm like older millennial. We had to navigate this as it was a new tool. And I would just add a rule to Allie's rule, and maybe it's changed because there's a lot of grandparents who are posting weird stuff now, but I used to say, never post anything that you wouldn't want your grandmother to see or you wouldn't want to see on the front page of the newspaper the next day. I still believe that. I don't know what your grandparents are like, but still. It's really important that even now, if you're thinking about a future in politics, and maybe it will change, we're in the era of Trump, and maybe, people don't care what honor you bring to an office, potentially. Sorry, we're not partisan. But you still, I think, have to conduct yourself differently. You're held to a very different standard as a young woman. So I would be very thoughtful about what you post and make sure it threads together in the direction of the kind of issues you care about, the kind of person you want people to see you as. And also remember, I think, to what Sumbul is saying, have a healthy relationship with social media. I don't care what age people are. When I see them live tweeting a meeting and they're actual elected official, I think, how are you paying attention and doing your job, when you're on Twitter so much? So, those likes, those tweets, those retweets, whatever they are like little pellets of food for a hamster. You have to put it down and actually engage with people. And there's obviously more brain science coming out about this, but you're not going to have a healthy governance style or relationship to social media if you can't do that face-to-face and engage with people. So just be really thoughtful about how you make it in service to you rather than be in service to your social media.
Thank you, ladies. So we are 10 days since we had an election last week, and we still have a lot of ballots to count in some states. We've seen this huge wave of women who are getting elected in the highest numbers in Congress in my lifetime. And we have Congresswoman Ocasio, who last year has shared, obviously, that she was waiting tables and now is in freshman orientation. And so I'd love us to talk a little bit about what are we learning about young women's roles in our current democracy?
I'd say we're learning that you're needed now. You're needed yesterday. Our involvement isn't contingent upon us having all of the degrees or all of the experience or working our way up some government ladder that is a myth that you absolutely don't need to do. If you have that experience, many of us have student loans, or we are looking for affordable housing, or there are other issues that are directly impacting us as women, as millennials. There are a variety of different instances where I've looked at the current legislative climate and said, well, nobody here represents my belief, and when you do that, that's your time to get involved, whether you're involved in your community as an activist or you decide to get on the ballot yourself. And it just goes to show you that there are people who, it's not just people who can run, who can rally the support, but there are people who look at young women and say, yes, she has something. She maybe doesn't represent me across the board, but she has value, and she has a perspective that is going to be valued to the entire country. And it's such an exciting time. I always say, when I started Leading Ladies and my whole initiative to help train young women to see themselves in politics and to run, I always said, well, my goal is one day that I don't have to do this. And looking at this election, I feel like we're so much further along and so much more at that level. This has been like the dream, to see this wave of powerful and dynamic and diverse women to come to the table. So if you're sitting here today and you're thinking, yeah, there's something that I'm really passionate about and there isn't somebody representing me, and maybe I'm not done with college, or maybe I haven't gone to grad school, or I haven't even run before or worked on a campaign, guess what? The time is now. You are needed. You can be there, you can do this, and if you need any help, I know I speak for myself and everyone else up here, I hope that people like us can help you get there, and talk to us. This is a network, and I think everyone in this room, too, is capable of helping elevate the next generation of leaders.
So I think, while I really, really celebrate the women that have made up this blue wave that's gotten to Congress, and many of them were state legislators very recently, like Ilhan Omar in Minnesota, I don't want to forget that we have some bad news at the state levels. Again, this is nonpartisan, but I think it's fair to say that what happened in Georgia is an abomination, and it disenfranchised a lot of people. And we probably should have our first black female governor in the country. And we shouldn't underestimate the power of seeing women in office as your local judges, like we saw 19 black women elected in Houston. We shouldn't underestimate seeing women as mayors, because that breaks that final glass ceiling of not seeing women in executive roles, and particularly in state legislatures. I've been doing this for 8 years, and I still can't say it. And governors, because so many decisions are made at the state level, and so much of our future ability to be enfranchised and be involved in the political discourse happens at the state level. So we should really celebrate what's happening in Congress, and I hope that they help make sure that voices are heard around the country as well, because we've seen some scary stuff in this election as well. What I will say about this exciting wave in Congress and beyond is that there should be some updated information. It's very nerdy, but the last time we looked at how many young people are in office comprehensively was a while back. I would like to see something updated, but in the mid-2000s, the study showed that young people under 35 in office it was about 5% of all elected officials in the country. And when you look at that 5%, a quarter of the 5%, so about 1.5% of all elected officials, were women under the age of 35. Okay, so hold that statistic. And then when you think about who makes it to Congress, that is a group of people where over half of them started in politics before the age of 35. So that is a bottleneck for white Christian men. And guess who they like to make the most laws about? Women under 35 and their bodies. So there is a science here about what it takes to start young, like you all are hopefully thinking about doing and will do, and make it all the way to those highest levels of power. I think we look at these women who've emerged on the national scene and think, wow, they really came out of nowhere, but they didn't. Ayanna Pressley was your city councilor for a long time and brought a lot of other women of color with her to the city council. You know, Ilhan Omar was in the state legislature. Stacey Abrams was the minority leader in the Georgia legislature. So you are looking at a lot of women who have paid their dues and have deep experience. And so I don't want you to walk away thinking, I just need to have a better Twitter account, right? You need to, you know, respect the hustle, like Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez has said, and put the time in on the pavement and get to know your local community to lead. So, you know, really think about this wave as the product of so much of hard work from women and people of color, and that there were probably more seats to be won, and we were cheated out of those. And frankly, we have to pay attention to that for future elections.
Well said. And I'll add that I think this wave is very important and so exciting. I think if you're thinking about running for office and it seems daunting, then think about other things that you can do in the local community. There's boards and commissions. You can start somewhere and go step by step, because there's a big experience in that. I think people have been asking me, what do I need to do? And I say, first, you know, is there an issue that you're passionate about? Have you reached out to this board that exists? I think there are issues with boards and commissions, and we're seeing it in Cambridge. A lot of people who have the time, right, who are retired are on these boards and commissions. So we do also have to think about how we're promoting people to get involved and get experiences in elected life, in local government, because there are already these pre-existing barriers that exist. If I am a mom with kids, I may be interested in municipal broadband, but I have to go home every day and feed the kids. If I'm not getting some sort of stipend to be on a board, it's going to make it harder for me to participate. So I would encourage the young women in the room to think about how to get more involved in that way, because there is running for office, and that's a path, but it is a long path, as you say. There is a lot of hustle in between. There's a lot of different experiences you can get. So I'm just very, very excited that we have this movement, and it's giving more young women ideas of what they can be. So it's very exciting.
Well, you teed up our afternoon. So if you're in our Young Women's track this afternoon, you're going to walk away with your plan today. And we'll start with, what do you want to change in your community? I wanted to see if we had any questions from our audience. Amy's going to run, but you can, do you mind standing and...
Hi, my name is Amy Asser. I do public policy at State Street. Thank you so much. So you talked a lot about the positives. I just want to know who has confronted you as you've been running and said, you kind of touched on this, but how have you handled those situations where people have said, you shouldn't run, or you don't represent me, or you don't have enough experience, and how have you handled those conversations?
All right, who wants to start that one? Oh, who are the haters?
Who are the haters?
Is that the framework? How do we won't name anyone today, but how do we work with folks that are not who don't necessarily want to vote with us?
So I'll start off. When I was working in Congresswoman Ileana Ross-Layton's office, I was actually on the Hill, getting to know different mentors, being paired up with people, and I remember meeting with a gentleman who said, okay, so you've been a fellow in this office on the Hill, where do you see yourself moving on the Hill next? And I said, well, I'm planning on moving back home, but where I see myself here next is as a member of Congress. And he just looked at me and was like, okay. You need to do a little bit more before that happens. You need to slow down. And I explained to him, I really feel that by the time I'm back here, it's because I ran, and that could be in a couple of years. And I hope that this gentleman is looking at the election now and saying, okay, well, she was right. Young women can do this and be successful. But on the other head of the same coin, there was a young woman who was working in an office in a legislative position on the Hill too, who had met with my cohort of fellows, a bunch of young women who were excited to run for office one day, and she told us, you need to pay your dues. And I'm working my way up, and we all left with such a bad taste in our mouth because so many of us had the intention to run, and now we're like, okay, well, here's another young woman telling us we need to pay our dues and we need to work behind the scenes. And again, this is an opportunity where if you are a woman in a place of power and you can be a mentor and you can support others, pull them up with you. Don't tell them you need to work your way to get here, because if you are ready to go and you have the passion and you have what you need to do to put that out there, then absolutely take it and run with it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. So I think a lot of this is just changing minds and perceptions, and I'm very hopeful that this past election has really started to do just that.
To either of you, does anyone else want to add anything before we take another question?
I have so many haters. What I've learned is you can't please everyone. You can't please everyone. And I think that's the biggest takeaway. I think people will often want to disagree with you, and that's good. People will say some things about your experience and what you've said. The nature of the roles we have, at first when I started, it was upsetting when someone would say, are you from Cambridge? Where's this name from? You grew up here? A lot of those questions of, you're not even from here, or, oh, you grew up in affordable housing and you went to Brown? I had a lot of that in the beginning, and you deal with it and you move on, because if you have it stick with you, it will prevent you from being successful. So early on, I realized can't please everyone. You engage. Sometimes you don't engage. If someone is being very rude and saying awful things, you say, I'm sorry, I can't speak to you right now. And you get comfortable with that, because if you really try and engage, and you will end up getting hurt. So you have to figure out ways to protect yourself as well. But you got to love the haters and deal with it.
Yeah.
And
that's when you know you made it.
That's exactly.
I had my first troll at 18.
Really quick, make it your fuel, eat it for breakfast, prove them wrong. When I first ran, my opponent said, I'd be curious to know what she thinks she brings to the table. I knocked on every door twice, I doubled his vote count, and I won by the largest margin of any challenger in the state.
Amy's got it. We're good. Please stand.
Hi, Sumbul. I just want to say thank you for every single thing that you do for Muslim women around Massachusetts. As a Muslim woman, my question is, what are some of the challenges of, being in the identity that you're in, and what advice would you give other Muslim women who might think about running for public office?
Well, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. My advice would be to be you. For me, I'm Muslim. I'm proud of being Muslim. I never, I really, I thought about how it would come up in Cambridge. And on one of my palm cards, I did put, I'm a young Muslim woman I kind of gave my little background, and I did get a call from someone who basically, it was right post the Charlottesville white supremacy rally. And she calls and says, why did you put this on the palm card? Why does that matter? I'm offended that you're putting the fact that you're Muslim on here. And she went on about how she felt about Islam. And I said, well, thank you for letting me know how you feel. And in my head, I was like, oh, typical white supremacist. But I didn't say that. But she hung up on me actually. But I didn't hang up on her. But I knew early on that I was going to probably get some of those calls. So if you prepare yourself, and that's what I would say, prepare yourself for the comments that you may likely get, because let's face it, we do live in a very, yes, we're a diverse society, but we are a segregated society. We have big issues with racism. structural racism. They are, ingrained in our society. So you have to prepare in that way. It's daunting to prepare because, I think as a woman of color, it is different to run as a woman of color. So you are dealing with different perceptions about you, but it's okay. You use that as fuel. You use it as fuel. I told my parents about that encounter. I told my family and friends about that encounter, and my dad was like, "Oh my God, like even in Cambridge, how can that happen?" And I said, "Yeah, even in Cambridge, And so, that's a long-winded answer of saying you'll never know what you'll get, but be authentic. It's a part of who you are, so be proud of it. I think for me, what has been the best result is when I'm going to a mosque or if I'm going to a development that I know is very Muslim, the moms and dads, when they see me, they look to their daughter and they're like, "Oh, that could be you one day." Right? And they absolutely, it can be them one day because it is possible. It's definitely possible, and we're seeing it more and more. So I encourage you to run. I encourage anyone who has any doubts to put themselves out there because it is a really important thing that you can do.
Can we take one more question? We'll take one more question. Ray, choose from your middle center here. Oh.
Can you guys touch on the alternative? So I ran for state representative, lost my election by 90 votes, but then I went on to organize 45,000 people to march against racism. So,
Yeah.
So one of the things no one ever talks about is when you don't win and what to do next. Can you guys speak on, there are other ways to get plugged in, to be a part of your community, even though you may have lost your election?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you.
Yes.
Huge round of applause. Thank you for doing what you have done. So I commend you for that. And there are so many different avenues of approach for getting involved in politics, whether you are testifying at your state house or maybe writing an op-ed or even just being an advocate and putting yourself out there. Again, using social media. You can blog about things, you can connect people. And one of the great things about being involved as a candidate or as a staff member is you learn how to organize, you learn how to rally people around a cause, whether or not you won. When I was running a campaign, we were in a Trump district, and she was a young Democratic female, and she had the most votes of any Democrat on that ballot. And we're like, all right, we lost tonight, but this goes to show you there are people out there who are listening, there are people who care about what you had to say, and you have to propel that forward. So I think one of the best things you can do, one of the best modes of education is being involved in a campaign as a candidate or as a staff member, and then channeling that into advocating and getting people to keep the momentum up. So thank you for what you've done, and I hope that that's some helpful different avenues for you.
So I think Eisenhower said this, but I first heard it when Ambassador Samantha Power said it, but the only title greater than president is citizen. And when people come to the legislature and bring 40,000 people, they have a much bigger voice than anyone in that building. And there is formal authority, and then there is leadership, right? And just because someone has formal authority doesn't mean that they are exercising leadership. So what you did was leadership. And second, I do hope you run again. Not that that is the highest and greatest thing you can do is run for office. I do think that's probably why we're here. But everybody loses. I spent 8 years in the legislature, my entire 20s, and I ran for lieutenant governor when I was 29 in 2016. It was a weird year all over the place, but I got the highest, I got double digits. I was the first woman of color to ever get double digits in a statewide election in Vermont. And I felt very proud of that, and it allowed me to take a break and go to the Kennedy School. And again, I'm watching the video at the Kennedy Library. And, President Kennedy, when he was in 1956, when he was a senator, ran to be vice president. and lost. And he says, he says in his reflections, you learn more from losing than winning. Really, all the mysteries of politics are revealed to you. I'm still figuring out all the mysteries, but at the same time, you really, you will lose more than you win. Everybody has in politics, everybody you've seen who's president, who's in Congress as a governor, because you're putting yourself out there. And the only way you truly lose is if you never put yourself out there at all. So thank you for everything you've done.
Well, we are coming to a close to our Young and Running plenary this morning, and I just want to close with two pieces that I've circled here. One is I feel like all of us have run because we really truly want to honor and serve our communities, and in whatever leadership roles that we have within our communities, that's the big piece, is the call to service, is that my work is never about Sara, it's about my community. And at Ignite, we're changing the face of democracy every single day. And that is a really big piece for us to keep working towards. And then I think this panel and our work is writing this new narrative. We're going to be teaching our kids about what's happening in 2018 in a whole other way than what happened in 1984. And so I believe that we are all leveraging our positions of privilege and power in the most positive ways, and I encourage all of you to continue this conversation, and I think we are going to a break shortly, but I will turn it back to Anne. Thank you all so much. But I want a picture on the stage. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our moderator and our panelists. I'm looking for a word that goes beyond inspiration, and I can't quite get it, but I'm deeply inspired by what each of you has done, and I know what you will do. And I'm also thinking about where we were in November 2016 when we had our last biennial, and there were so many long faces and eyes brimming with tears. And if we could have even imagined this panel and the work that Ignite is doing all over the country. I found out last night from Sara and Amy that they're in half the states, and by 2020, they're going to be in the 50 states. And we're going to be seeing young women leaders from every state in the country.